In the last module, we saw that the various tweaks and manipulations of the basic oppositional substance dualist framework don't seem to make any significant inroads in addressing the problems that we found to be inherent in adopting that framework. Now we want to turn our attention to monisms and see if they can overcome the sorts of problems that seem inherent to their frameworks. So recall that when we formulate a monism, we suppose there's only one kind of substance. If we're formulating a physicalistic monism, then we suppose that there is a physical substance, that is a substance that's characterized by its manifestation of the sorts of properties that we associate with physical objects. The question then becomes, how do we understand how it is possible for that substance that has those sorts of properties to somehow also generate and support these mental properties, when these mental properties seem fundamentally different in kind from the physical properties that would be responsible for their generation. And so when we try to understand this, at least in the abstract, it looks difficult to imagine how this could be done, at least how this could be done without fundamentally changing the way in which we understand mental properties like angst or joy or consciousness. If we look to the other type of classical monism, and we look at monistic idealism, say following Bishop Berkeley, then we suppose again that there's a single fundamental entity, a single substance, and that substance gets understood, characterized, defined by its ability to manifest that fundamental set of mental properties. Then the problem becomes, how do we understand how such a monistic ontological framework can explain, predict, manipulate the emergence of physicalistic properties using only this mental entity together with the mental properties that it most properly exhibits. And just as before, it's difficult to imagine how those mental properties could give rise to the sorts of physicalistic properties like resistance or extension or shape that we normally associate with the physical domain of physics or chemistry or biology. Thus, there's no obvious way for either of our monisms to move forward to address the difficulties that seem to be inherent in monistic ontological frameworks. However, like the dualist, we might be tempted to see if we can tweak the basic monistic framework in order to make progress on this endemic difficulty. We might say, hey, look, our problem here is how we're supposed to generate one set of properties from the other set of properties, because our substance is defined by, understood through one characteristic set of properties and then must explain the others. So maybe what we should do is have our one substance just as before, and our two characteristic sets of properties, the mental, the physical, and then we'll assume that this substance, it actually is defined by, characterized by the fact that all of those properties are characteristic of it. It is understood because it's the sort of thing that can have all these properties. And see, then we won't have to explain one set in terms of the other set. Now, this might seem sort of tempting. We might think, now we don't have to worry about that. But it's not quite clear that this makes any progress at all. We still have one substance, but our fundamental categories of mental and physical are still characterized in a way that is oppositional and distinct, so that we don't really have any way of understanding how it is that the mental and the physical somehow are interacting with each other. And since they're oppositional in nature, we don't really have any way of understanding the substance itself. So if we take, for instance, Descartes' kind of properties, and we say, well, angst is an unextended thing that doesn't offer physical resistance. All right then. So we've got a substance that's characterized by having properties that have no extension or resistance, but it's a substance that is characterized in terms of its manifestation of extension and resistance. So it looks like the substance itself becomes incoherent precisely because it's the sort of thing that can manifest anything and everything. Likewise, when is it that the substance manifests these mental properties and why, as opposed to when it manifests the physical properties only? None of these difficulties seem to get addressed by supposing this kind of property dualism, that is, one substance, dualistic property categories. So again, we've tried to tweak our basic monistic framework, and it doesn't really seem to move us any closer to resolving the problem that seems to be endemic to this particular approach to specifying an ontological framework.